Maureen Dowd is a Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times columnist and author of a new collection of profiles called Notorious that takes us inside the minds of celebrities, political power players, and tech world titans. We'll talk about the book, of course, but we're also here to talk about how Maureen is feeling as we enter this unnerving new chapter of the Trump administration. Maureen, hi, great to see you as a decades long devotee of your columns and your articles. I'm always so excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me, Katie.
So I wanted to ask you about this recent potential glimmer of hope that people are embracing like it's the second coming. And I'm talking about the Supreme Court election in the state of Wisconsin and what happened in Florida, where Republicans won, but by not as large a margin as they had hoped. Do you think this is the hope we've been waiting for, the moment that many people who are confounded by Donald Trump and his merry band of mischief makers has been waiting for?
No, I mean, it's good that the Wisconsin voters rejected the idea of a billionaire buying a Supreme Court seat, but he's already kind of bought the government. So, it's a setback, but we didn't learn anything we didn't know. We know that a lot of Trump voters don't like Elon Musk and they think he has too much power. My former researcher, Sean McCreesh, who's now a White House reporter, did a great piece recently when Elon and Trump went to the wrestling match in Philadelphia, and he interviewed all the Trump voters. And there was a woman there who said, I don't like Elon. It's like he has his hand in the cookie jar and it shouldn't be there. So Trump voters are already wary of the power that Elon and the Doge wolf pack have. So yes, it's good, but the Democrats have a long way to go.
Do you think this was more of a referendum then on Elon Musk than it was on Donald Trump? Or do
yeah.
You don't
Yeah,
think there's any
because
backlash?
Elon Musk is, as you've seen this over and over again. Oftentimes it's presidents' wives who are the lightning rod. We saw it with Nancy Reagan and Barbara Bush and Vice President Marilyn Quayle and
Hillary Clinton when she was first lady, of course.
Hillary Clinton, yeah. And so in this case, Elon Musk is Donald Trump's lightning rod.
And de facto first lady in a way?
Yes. There was one point where it was reported that Trump told Elon to move into the Lincoln bedroom, but even Elon knew that might not be the best thing. So Elon has limits too.
If you say so. I mean, I haven't seen any so far, but
just the Lincoln bedroom.
Yeah, the Lincoln bedroom one. Yeah. At this point, I feel like you and I and other journalists have spent really years trying to dissect Donald Trump's pathology.
But also, I'm curious because when we first got to know each other, you were a Pentagon reporter, and I'm curious, when you look at this Pentagon and Hegseth and the signal chat, how does that fit in with your Pentagon knowledge?
Well, it's obviously a huge change. I was at the Pentagon reporting, Maureen, if you remember, when Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense, Colin Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Right.
I hadn't had that much experience covering the military. I went to Operation Desert Storm and I covered all kinds of things. And my respect for the military grew so much because I really hadn't, my dad was in the Navy during World War II, but I really didn't know that much about military operations or.
Yeah, I remember being so impressed. I just thought, how can she do that? I never could have had a beat like that.
Yes, you could have, Maureen. But anyway, I studied military hardware on my honeymoon, I remember. but I the difference between an F-18A and an F-16. But anyway, I mean, competence was oozing out of every corner of that building. And I think that now it's just, I mean, I don't go to the Pentagon, I don't cover the Pentagon, but it couldn't be more different. And now the person who he wants to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he was impressed, this guy Raising Cane, he was impressed by his appearance. I mean,
Right.
Donald Trump seems to be obsessed with the way people look, not
Yeah, I
only in
think
real
this
life,
whole
but on television.
yeah, and I think this whole signal chat thing is a good example of why you shouldn't cast your cabinet by their looks.
Right.
I mean, that is the direct result of that. He's got the Fox weekend anchor in charge of, what is it, 850 million billion?
Yes.
Yeah, $850 billion budget.
Who had never really run a big organization.
Right.
It is mind boggling. But when you think about your years of covering Donald Trump, I'm curious what you're thinking now. Do you think this was his wish all along, but he was restrained by some of the saner people like General Mattis, Rex Tillerson, people that he had picked to surround him, and now he is just completely unrestrained and unbridled by any really people with institutional knowledge of Washington?
Yeah, I mean, the first time there were a lot of people in place like Mattis and who were devising schemes to make sure he was contained. The way that Kissinger had an idea to restrain Nixon if he got drunk and called and ordered up a strike or something. There were a lot of people like Mattis and his pals who were going to restrain Trump. And then there were other officials who were taking things from his desk because they worried if he saw it, what would he do? There was a lot of maneuvering around him, to constrain him, restrain him. But now,
Almost babysitting, right, Maureen?
yes, exactly. That's what we used to joke. It was federal daycare, Donald Trump's White House. But now he's thrown off all of those guardrails and he's surrounded by people who are eager and willing to do whatever he wants. And, when you watch these cabinet meetings, first it was Dear Leader with Trump, where they were so obsequious, so sycophantish. But then the last one, it was also Elon. He wanted them to be that way about Elon because of what was going on with Tesla. So they were doing it to both of them. Like Rubio was saying to Trump, oh, only a world leader like you. And all of this crazy sycophantish language that has never, that at that level has not existed before.
Well, you talk about sycophantish and obsequious behavior. I mean, nothing illustrates that like the Republican members of Congress. Have you been astounded? Although it looks like there's some people who are starting to make noises about tariffs in the Republican Party, but have you been astounded, Maureen, as a longtime Washington observer, that people are the fealty towards Trump by every single Republican is unquestioned. And there has been no indication that people want to criticize him or disagree with him. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen, that the Republicans kind of let Donald Trump swallow their party whole. I mean, if you covered George W. Bush, you would go into his rallies and there would be fighter jet movies, and the Republicans just stood for certain things. And Trump has turned all that upside down. And, as he has kind of with American values. And, yeah, and the Republicans just went along with it. So it's crazy to watch them arguing for things that they have fought, the whole life of their party for. It's nuts, tariffs, and yeah.
Are they terrified, do you think, Maureen? I mean, what is behind it? This
I don't know. They're just, they are very craven. I mean, when you look back at old movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you're thinking, where's Jimmy Stewart? Where's the guy who's going to stand up and say, no, this is nuts? But it doesn't seem to be happening. They all go along. They just have molded their positions to be like his, even though his were so counter to what the party stood for.
I know that you have long used Shakespeare analogies and characters to explain and understand Washington, but do you think these times call for maybe a darker literary reference like Kafka?
Kafka. That's good. I'll take Kafka. I'll take Kafka and raise you to Pirandello. Yeah, everybody always asks me because I studied Shakespeare in college, and then I recently went to graduate school at Columbia for
Which was
more
so cool, by
Shakespeare.
the way.
Yeah, well, it was expensive, but I have struggled. I do think, you can see shades of Richard III in Trump in the way he, Richard III would talk to the audience and tell them the bad thing he was about to do and make them kind of complicit in it. And that's the kind of relationship Trump has, a very direct relationship like that with his fans, and he talks to them. I've never seen a politician who talks to his fans the way you would talk to your best friend. And that creates this strong bond. So he's a little bit like Richard III that way. But in general, I think he's more of a dark P.T. Barnum. He's the showman. And it's very strange to watch him, because even as he's having this authoritarian dear leader side, which is very worrisome, he has the kind of wacky Liberace side. So he's putting gold cupids up in the Oval Office, and he has a gold TV remote and stuff you're kind of laughing at. It's so wacky. And then it deflects from the fact that in this term, he's much more authoritarian minded, Also, just when he says we're going to take Greenland one way or the other, before he would make fun of George W. Bush and people for being too hawkish and wasting time on war and this kind of thing. And now he himself sounds more hawkish, which is very strange when you watched him his whole career. Because even though he went to military school and loves military parades and stuff, it was always like, why is North Korea doing that? Why don't they just build a luxury hotel on the beach? It was much more from the point of view of a businessman. But now, he is kind of saying things that sound more hawkish, which I find worrisome.
It's confusing too, Maureen, because he ran on being more of an isolationist, getting out of foreign entanglements, and now he's talking about Greenland, the Panama Canal, and of course, building a luxury resort in Gaza. I mean, it is so bizarre. Do you think that because his craziness is coming so fast and furiously, people aren't even able to ingest and process what he says? Because, this flooding of the zone that Steve Bannon recommended, it does seem to be working at a certain level. It is hard to keep up with all the insanity.
Yeah, I know a lot of people think he's deflecting or look over here, but he does have that kind of mindset where he flits from one thing to another. His favorite thing to do back when I first started interviewing him, maybe in the 90s, was like a pop quiz where I would just bring up different things in the news and he would answer very fast. He loved that. He would always want to do that. And he does have that kind of butterfly attention span. So it's, when people say he's doing things just to deflect, I don't know. I think he likes to kind of be all over the place.
And that's how his mind works in some way.
Yeah. Mhm.
There's been so much discussion, Maureen, in the last, 2 months about a constitutional crisis. If this administration is truly a threat to democracy. And I'm curious where you stand on that. Many people are like, it's obvious that we've been in a constitutional crisis for weeks. Others have said, we'll see what the judiciary does and if he, in fact, listens to the judiciary or doesn't. Where do you think we are? And do you think democracy is really in danger?
Well, a lot of people thought that the last time around, and I wasn't that worried about it then. But he does seem to be deliberately undermining, the different branches of government and sort of turning himself into the emperor of chaos. So I am more concerned about it because it's like when I was little, we used to call this looking for a bookend. It's like he is looking for a fight with the judiciary and, looking to establish executive power over all the branches. So I find what he does very much more nerve-wracking this time.
I'm curious how you interpreted that whole Oval Office performance with Zelensky, JD Vance, and Donald Trump, and what you thought of their dressing down of Zelensky and this cozying up to Putin. Maureen, you and I have been doing this for a long time, and to just completely upend the world order that's really been in existence since the end of World War II and our, traditional allies. It is so bizarre. And I've asked a lot of people, like, why is he doing this? What is it about Vladimir Putin other than he's a strong man he admires that would motivate him to change U.S. foreign policy so dramatically? And
Yeah.
what do you think it is?
I don't know. I hate to admit this because I have always specialized in the psyche of the presidents. And it's hard to admit that it's hard to figure out Trump's psyche on this because, a lot of people think that Putin has something on him. And I don't even think that. I think he is drawn to kind of strong men. I mean, his father was very strong,
And I
but
think sort of abusive, right?
yeah,
As was Elon Musk's father. So I wonder if
right,
Elon Musk is looking
exactly.
at Donald Trump as a father figure.
Yes. And, the Biden people had their problems with Zelensky. They would complain about him a lot. And I don't know, but just watching that Oval Office meeting with Zelensky and Vance made me sort of sick to my stomach because Vance was sort of baiting him in this very unpresidential way and trying to bring him to his knees. And I found the whole thing really gross. I mean, I'm not saying Zelensky is perfect. I don't know. The Biden people had a lot of complaints too, but
Yeah, I wonder
that,
why,
that public display
right.
to someone, who's fighting off Putin was gross to me.
What was it about Zelensky that upset the Biden people? Because you're right, they kept that sort of under wraps.
Yeah,
What
they
was the
thought
source of their frustration?
he was always pushing and he wasn't grateful enough. And, I think they did not have a warm, cozy relationship with him either. But to publicly try and, humiliate him and castrate him in the Oval Office for everyone to see, just, I thought, was unworthy of American leaders.
I wanted to ask you about your relationships with your family members, because I know you grew up in a Democratic household, the daughter of a DC police detective who was in charge of Senate security for 20 years. But several of your relatives, your brother, your sister Peggy, to whom you dedicate this book, still like Donald Trump. And I love how you use them as a barometer for understanding the Trump voter. How are it's Kevin, your brother Kevin, and your sister Peggy, how are they feeling about Donald Trump now?
Well, when I go to Kevin's for Thanksgiving every year, and this year they popped the Trump champagne, which I have to say is good champagne. But then he had a long Trump toast prepared. And he saw the look on my face and kind of cut it short after a couple of minutes. But, they have problems with Trump too. My sister has some issues with Trump. She doesn't like the way he's always selling things, the gold sneakers and, the
Watches, the
yeah,
crypto. I mean,
yeah,
you could go
she
on
thinks
and on.
that's really tacky. And both of them, of course, were kind of appalled at January 6th because my dad,
Of
worked
course.
he was in charge of safety at the Capitol for 20 years. He was the police detective who oversaw that. So, but in general, they seem to be happy with him. So we don't talk about it every time we get together. In fact, usually we talk about movies so that there are no arguments involved. But it does give me, my sister came on my book tour, and, people were really curious. They would go up and talk to her, and, they were curious how we can be so close when, we disagree about Trump. But mostly we don't talk about Trump so that we don't argue about it.
So no cracks in their support after these first couple of months of this new Trump administration at all?
No. You said my dad was a Democrat. He stayed up all night the night Truman was elected. He was so excited. And my brother Kevin stayed up all night the first time Trump was elected because he was so excited. And that's how the Democrats lost the working class. They just had a series of kind of candidates who seemed to have disdain for the working class, and they lost them.
I guess that started with Hillary Clinton's comment about the deplorables and
when at Thanksgiving, my brother had some teddy bear dressed up in a Deplorable Lives Matter t-shirt. Yeah, but it was before that because, Michael Dukakis, they just had a lot of kind of, I would say John Kerry, to my family, they seemed sort of sniffy and, without the common touch nominees, Al Gore, John Kerry, Hillary. They didn't seem to care as much about the working class. That's what my family thought.
But they must have liked Bill Clinton because he seemed to have the common touch, did they?
My mom liked Bill Clinton. My mom, after my dad died when I was in college, Ronald Reagan came along and my mom fell in love with him. So everyone became Republican with Reagan once my dad was gone. And they liked Reagan,
Let's turn to your book, because I know we want to make sure people know that you've put together a collection of many of your most fascinating profiles. And I love, obviously, reading you every week, Maureen, but I also love when I can sink my teeth into one of these delicious, very detailed, keenly observed profiles. Um, Tell me what it's been like for you professionally to be able to do that versus kind of writing a fairly short column every week. That must have been incredibly liberating and fun for you.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you knew, we had an editor named Janet Elder who has since died, who was a good friend of mine, and I was complaining to her that I missed listening to people as opposed to with a column, you're telling people what to think. It's a polemic, basically. And I really missed listening to people and hearing what they were saying. And also from the beginning of my career, I've always done these Hollywood or entertainment or cultural pieces on the side. And so I've been doing that since, the 90s or maybe even earlier. And so I had interviewed a lot of people when they were at their height, like Kevin Costner, when he was the head Hollywood hunk. And I interviewed Al Pacino and Paul Newman before they finally won their Oscars for the movies they won their Oscars for. And I also started going out and interviewing Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and other Silicon Valley types, Jaron Lanier, when we began to realize that there was this monumental fight about AI going on, where Elon Musk was the good guy in 2017, trying to figure out ways to save humanity. That's why he and Sam Altman started OpenAI, because they were worried that all the other geniuses who were doing AI for other companies did not have a kill switch or any way to save us. So they started OpenAI to watch out for us. But then, Elon didn't. There's a funny anecdote in the Elon piece where he was talking to Demis Hassabis, who is in charge of Google's AI program, DeepMind. And he was saying to Demis, that's why I want to go to Mars, so that we'll have some place to go, a bolt hole, a safety place, if AI takes over the Earth. And Demis just started laughing and he said, Elon, AI can follow you to Mars. AI is in the ether, And Elon was like, what? So Elon was, and that's why Elon and Sam Altman are now locked in this Titanic lawsuit, because Sam Altman at some point after Elon left decided, there were billions to be made. So he changed OpenAI to a for-profit thing, which wasn't the point of it. The point of it was to be our guardian in AI. And that's why, and from Sam Altman's point of view, he would say Elon's just jealous because after he left, OpenAI turned into the hot chat GTP, thing. And yeah, so all of those guys are so fascinating. And when I first started interviewing them in 2017, they barely knew Washington was, the capital of the country. They didn't care. They were the capital of the country. But then at some point, Bezos and Elon and Zuckerberg realized they could sort of buy the government. So they did.
Do you think that people are less willing to sit down and do these profiles? We hear a lot, Maureen, about this age of disintermediation where people can talk directly to people and they don't need a journalist kind of shaping their messaging. If you called me and I was a well-known, CEO or something, I think I would be really maybe a little terrified about having you sit across from me and shaping who I was to New York Times readers. Are there some people you'd like to interview who have said no? I want you to sit down with Lauren Sanchez. I find her fascinating.
Yeah, I would like to do that as well. That's why, because the column, one of my editors had suggested calling my column at the beginning Stiletto. just like, no, but it does, the column has a reputation for being sharply critical of presidents who are screwing up or whatever. So it did make it hard to get people to talk to me. And some of the people in the book, I spent 20 years trying to get Bob Iger to talk with me. But then finally, they'll have a book coming out or something, and then they'll want a big piece. So eventually, sometimes it took 2 years, 3 years. In Iger's case, 20 years. I tried for a long time to get Barry Diller. And then in the middle of the interview, he pulled out a pack of cigarettes and began smoking. I said, I didn't know you smoked. And he goes, I'm so nervous. And when you make Barry Diller nervous, that's a scary place to be because he's fearsome, But yeah, but the tone of these pieces is much different. I want it to be a warmer forum. Oftentimes I'm picking people I admire, either for their talent, like Patti Smith, or leadership abilities. When I did Iger the first time he was at Disney before he came back. And so unless you really are a jerk, like Kevin Costner was, or Eddie Murphy was, like, sort of a jerk too. I want it to be them talking and just a warmer thing. I'm not critiquing them as I do.
A little less Dorothy Parker.
Yeah, yeah. I'm letting them talk. So someone has to really go out of their way to kind of come off as a jerk, but some of them do.
I know the aforementioned Kevin Costner, that was really disappointing to me. And
yeah,
so basically some women came over to ask for his photograph and he snapped at them and said, can't you see I'm being interviewed?
Yeah, we were in New Orleans. I guess he was filming JFK down there. And he was in a bad mood because JFK was very controversial. And also people were critiquing his now you see it, now you don't English accent as Robin Hood. And it was his first brush with being the top Hollywood hunk and getting criticized. So he was just in a very sour mood that day. And these two wonderful New Orleans senior women just very politely asked him if they could take a picture with him at a red light. And he just bit their heads off. And and then that was our whole interview. He bit my head off. And then at the end, he put his hand on the back of my neck and squeezed my neck. And he goes, don't worry, everybody has a bad day sometimes. I was like, you're the one having the bad day, not me. But he was also like, are you going to play this tape with me for your girlfriends? And I said, well, I interviewed Paul Newman and I didn't play that tape for my girlfriends. So I guess I can resist playing you for my girlfriends. But I know he was flirtatious and charming with other reporters, but, he was just having an off day with me.
Did you hear from him or his publicist after the?
No, I don't even think he knew. I kept trying to explain I was from the New York Times. He was angry that I was getting a private interview instead of on the junket, where they talk to
everybody and their brother
at the same time. And he
Yeah.
kept asking me, why do you get this private interview? And I kept saying, well, because they want a story in Arts and Leisure in the New York Times. But he just was he was just upset about everything that day. And, like you, I loved No Way Out and I love watching him on screen. And, I still like watching him on screen. So.
You also did a very interesting and powerful interview with Uma Thurman. And I'm curious how that came to be, Maureen. This was when she talked about Harvey Weinstein and about being sexually assaulted and then also injured on the set of Kill Bill after Quentin Tarantino insisted she do her own stunt. It was interesting. I went to her play and I visited her afterwards to try to get her to do an interview with me.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Wow.
I did. And I think it was a much better written piece, actually. Although I was bummed that she talked to you and not me, but that's okay. But
Oh, I didn't, I had just seen one quote she gave that made it sound like she had a story to tell. So when I saw that quote, because we'd already broken the Me Too thing and she wasn't part of it, the New York Times Me Too coverage. So she had a quote like, I will talk when the time is right or whatever. And I just called and, you know, right after I saw her, I got the flu and I was gone for 2 weeks, but she waited for me. And then she told the story. And it was one of the hardest stories I've ever done because it turned out not to be your typical Me Too story. She did have the story of Harvey luring her into the bath and the white bathrobe, the ominous white bathrobe came out. And she did have that story, and that was traumatic. But the real story that she wanted to tell was about how she thought Quentin Tarantino had tried to kill her. And this was one of the most famous actress auteur combinations in history, Alfred Hitchcock and Ingrid Bergman level. And she very much contributed to the Kill Bill script. She came up with the Bloody Bride idea. And, she was very much a collaborator with him. And so he put her in this Carmen Ghia that I think she wanted to drive a stick shift, and it was an automatic. And he made a lot of changes at the last minute. He changed the route that she was taking. He didn't want to use a stunt woman because he wanted her face to be in the rearview mirror with her blonde hair blowing. And he was absolutely determined to not give her help from the stunt team because he gave them the day off that day. And then he had changed the route and she got in the car, and she admitted she wasn't like the greatest driver to start with, and she really was scared to do it. And then when she got to the curve, there was an accident, and she could have been crippled. She said she still had a lot of neck and back pain. And uh, uh, Ethan Hawke, her then husband, had to rush. I think he was at a silent retreat or a monastery or something, and he had to rush to the set and confront Quentin and say, she's not the best driver, man. What are you doing? And he wouldn't call me back. So there were two things that were really scary about that story. Harvey was trying to get his career back by going to rehab in Arizona and playing Scrabble. And he reached out from the ashes of his career, and he still had power, even though his career had been decimated. And he got a friend of his in media to try and use my fact-checking questions to Harvey to write a story first that would debunk this and paint Uma and Harvey as tight. And when they called Uma, she played the younger virgin in La Liaison Dangereuse, but she's really more like the older, she knew how to manipulate things to save us. And she said, I will handle this. And I think she just told them she would talk to them after our pub date. And then with Quentin, she had spent 15 years trying to get this crash footage out of him, and she finally got it. And that's what, she wanted us to publish that because it justified her story. And this was really important to her to have this published. And our main lawyer, David McCraw, was off on book leave. So we had another woman who was a little less bold than David McCraw, and she did not want to publish it. She said it was like a fair use issue or something. And I just went over to my editor and put my hands on her shoulders, and I'm like, publish it. And so we published it, and Uma got some measure of peace for that, I think. And it got 8 million clicks. And I was really nervous because Quentin Tarantino, despite Uma's urging, would not call me back. So I couldn't get his side of the story. And I kind of was curled up on the couch in my house for 3 days. And then Quentin Tarantino gave an interview to Deadline, the Hollywood trade paper, and said all that happened and Uma was right and I shouldn't have done that to her, and I apologize. And it was
Wow.
just, as you know, as a reporter, it's just this huge sense of relief that the story, came together in all sides.
There's the story in getting the story always. Who would you love to profile next, Maureen, if you could pick anyone?
Yeah, most of the people I think about are historical figures rather than anyone now.
Like,
But I agree with you. I would love to talk to Lauren Sanchez. I think because Bezos owns the Post and we're the Times, maybe, I don't know. She gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal. She's a very interesting woman, I think.
what about, are you interested in Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, that whole story, which Megan Twohey and some of her colleagues broke in the Times, which is now kind of under some pressure from the Baldoni side of the story?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that tells you um, where we are on Me Too. Because back when we were doing Me Too, I think everyone would have instantly sided with Blake Lively. But now they're like, no, let's try and push Justin Baldoni through the trapdoor. But now they're like, no, let's try and look at both sides of the story more. Because, I asked people in Hollywood, where does Me Too stand now? And they were kind of like, oh, women, you had your moment. You're totally over. I mean, they're bringing back this guy, Jonathan Schell, to Paramount, who had lost his job.
Oh, you mean Jeff Shell?
Sorry, I mean Jeff Shell. Thanks,
Right.
Katie. And he had lost his job due to sexual harassment. And, Amazon gave $40 million to Brett Ratner, who had been totally exiled on sexual harassment charges. And he's doing the Melania documentary.
And they paid him $40 million.
Right. And all of these female executives are now being replaced again with male executives. So I think Trump has given them the license to turn the clock back a little bit on Me Too. But it did need a correction because, you can't just believe the woman's story. You have to hear the woman's story and examine the woman's story. But you also have to examine the man's story.
Before we go, I just want to real quickly ask you, Maureen, about this real assault on journalists that we're seeing from the White House, and a lot of what is it called, anticipatory obedience on the part of not just journalists but law firms and everyone, kind of, not everyone but many people kind of stepping in line with the Trump administration. I find that super concerning, and I'm curious how you have seen this turn of events.
Yeah, well, it's scary to watch. Trump is trying to, I used to worry about Dick Cheney dismantling checks and balances, but Trump and Elon are kind of trying to expand executive power while they diminish congressional power, with the Doge wolf pack. That what they're doing should be
And
in
the
the hands.
assault on judges, by the way.
Yeah, and the judiciary. So they're going after all the branches and the press. And Elon regularly says legacy press is dead. He tells people on X, you are the media now. And in the White House, they are replacing, I think this week they're pushing the reporters of legacy press who were in the front, they're pushing them to the back, and they took their places in the Pentagon where you sat probably. And, they have my assistant, Andrew Trunsky, is working on a story about interviewing Steve Bannon, has his own White House reporter. And Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, has his own White House reporter. And they're going to be the ones, the pillow guy's reporter is going to be the one in the front row instead of the New York Times. So, they're trying to diminish all the different checks and balances and the way the Constitution set it up. And, Trump is obviously, as we used to say when I was little, looking for a bookend. He's looking for a fight with the judiciary, and he's going to push on that. And it's, I find it much more alarming. I didn't think the Constitution was in danger last time. But this time it's pretty alarming.
Maureen, I love talking to you. I wish I could spend more time with you just over a martini talking about
Oh,
it.
yeah, you owe me an apple teeny. I think we've had that on the books for 10 years now.
Well, I'll make good on it. Let me know.
Okay, I want that.
Let me
I
know when
need
you're in.
that.
Yeah, I do too, or a few.
Yeah, a
Let me
few.
know when you're in New York. I'd love to see you. This latest collection is called Notorious. No one writes like you do. Nobody has this just keen observational skills, Maureen. I've just enjoyed and appreciated your work so much through the years, and it's a real thrill to talk to you whenever we get the chance.
Well, it's mutual. I'm a huge fan, Katie.